Welcome, curious minds, to AI History of Western Philosophy.
Great to be back.
Yeah, we're so glad you're joining us again. Today we're diving into another fascinating figure. But first, you know the drill. Just that quick heads up.
Right, the standard disclaimer.
Exactly. AI-generated content like this show, it can confabulate sometimes. It might present ideas as solid fact when maybe they're more nuanced.
And though our subject is philosophy.
We're not philosophers ourselves.
Definitely not claiming that.
So our mission here at AI History of Western Philosophy goes beyond just, pointing you to the original text, although that's super important.
Crucial, yeah.
It's really about experimenting with philosophy, sort of using it as raw material.
To see what sparks. Generate some new ways of thinking.
Precisely, opening up avenues for you to explore further. Okay, so today we're stepping back into, the really vibrant, often kind of turbulent intellectual world of 5th century BCE Greece.
A very exciting time.
Absolutely, and we're going to grapple with one of its most fascinating figures, but also, honestly, one of the most enigmatic, Protagoras of Abdera.
Ah, Protagoras. Yeah, enigmatic is the right word.
It really is, because studying him throws up this unique challenge, doesn't it? Scholars even call it the Protagoras Problem.
Mm-hmm. It's a real issue.
And the core of it is we know him almost entirely through the writings of his opponents.
Mostly Plato, yeah. His biggest critic.
Right. Imagine trying to understand, a brilliant musician only by reading reviews written by their fiercest rivals.
Doesn't sound like a fair picture, does it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
So trying to reconstruct his actual ideas becomes this act of, critical reconstruction. It's almost philosophical detective work.
You're piecing together clues left by people who didn't like him much.
Exactly. And there's even a term for this, which I find fascinating. Platonic overdetermination.
That's a good one.
It sounds academic, but it's really important. It basically means the historical Protagoras, the real guy, often gets buried under or even shaped by Plato's own agenda in his dialogues.
Plato needed Protagoras to play a certain role in his philosophical dramas.
Right. So understanding why Plato portrayed him the way he did is almost as crucial as understanding Protagoras himself. It adds this whole other layer.
And it's exactly that challenge, that complexity that makes him so compelling, I think. Because despite all those interpretive hurdles, his importance isn't really up for debate.
No, he was a major figure.
A central figure, absolutely, right at the heart of what we call the 5th century BCE Greek Enlightenment.
Which was a huge shift, wasn't it?
Massive. It was this pivotal moment where Greek thought really turned away from the big cosmological questions that pre-Socratics were obsessed with, thesis, the ultimate nature of the universe.
What was everything made of?
Exactly. And instead, it pivoted towards anthropina, human affairs, ethics, politics, language, society. That became the new focus.
And Protagoras is right there, leading that charge.
He was at the forefront. And his ideas were radical, genuinely radical for the time. His agnosticism about the gods, for one.
Which we'll definitely get into.
And of course, his most famous line, man is the measure of all things.
The big one.
Yeah. These weren't just abstract thoughts. They shook the very foundations of how people understood truth, morality, even piety.
So he wasn't just ruffling feathers, he was challenging the whole system.
Profoundly. And it's really important, I think, not to just accept the caricature his critics painted. The cynical rhetorician just teaching tricks to win arguments.
The sort of ambulance-chasing lawyer type of ancient Greece.
Kind of. Mm-hmm. But the evidence suggests he was a philosophically serious, systematic thinker. His worldview, whether you agree with it or not, provided this essential counterpoint, this dialectical pushback that was crucial for the development of Socrates and Plato's ideas.
So they needed him to argue against.
In a way, yes. He was the foundational counterpoint. You could almost say large parts of classical philosophy define themselves in opposition to Protagoras. He set the terms of the debate for generations.
That's a really powerful framing, the essential sparring partner. Okay, so let's try and unpack the man himself a bit more. Who was this guy living in this incredibly dynamic period?
Well, reconstructing his life, like we said, it's tricky. But we have some pieces.
Right, the mosaic fragments. What's the general consensus?
Okay, so born around 490 BCE, probably in Abdera, which is in Thrace up north. Died around 420 BCE.
Okay, so that makes him a contemporary of Pericles.
Right, the great Athenian statesman.
Yeah.
And about 20 years older than Socrates.
So part of that earlier wave of thinkers who really set the stage.
Exactly. And he has this distinct claim to fame, universally recognized as the first and probably the most eminent of the Greek Sophists.
And that term sophist, he apparently claimed it himself.
Reportedly, yes. He was proud of it. And for something like 40 years, he was constantly on the move, traveling all over the Greek world.
Doing what?
Teaching. He was a professional educator. And not just any teacher. He charged incredibly high fees.
Like really high.
Astronomical by ancient standards. Enough to amass a serious fortune. We're talking sums that dwarf what most people earned in a lifetime.
Wow. So, like, the first celebrity intellectual, maybe, the original thought leader charging top dollar.
That's not a bad analogy, actually. He was in high demand.
Now, with ancient figures, there's always this mix of fact and, well, later stories, right? Apocrypha. How do we sort that out with Protagoras?
Yeah, you have to be careful. There are stories about his youth, like being taught by Persian magi after Xerxes' invasion, or being discovered by Democritus, the atomist philosopher, who was also from Abdera.
It sounds a bit too neat.
Most scholars think so, yeah. Likely later inventions to connect famous figures.
And what about the really dramatic story, the trial?
Ah, yes. The tale of him being tried for impiety in Athens, having his book on the gods publicly burned, and then being exiled and dying in a shipwreck.
That sounds like a movie plot.
It does. It's a very compelling narrative, and it gets repeated a lot. But here's the thing. Our earliest and most detailed source, Plato, actually contradicts it.
How so?
Plato consistently depicts Protagoras dying of old age, reputation intact, still highly respected, albeit controversial. There's no mention of a trial or book burning in Plato.
So that dramatic ending is probably questionable.
Highly questionable.
Yeah.
It might tell us more about how later generations viewed controversial thinkers than about Protagoras' actual fate. We should be skeptical.
Okay, so setting aside the maybe fiction, what is more certain and really significant about his life?
His connection to Pericles. That seems solid.
The leader of Athens during its golden age? That's a big connection.
Huge. And it wasn't just, rubbing elbows at parties. It seems to have been a real meeting of minds, a partnership with political and intellectual substance.
Is there concrete evidence for that?
Yes. The most crucial piece is that around 444 BCE, Pericles commissioned Protagoras to draft the constitution for Thurii, a new, ambitious pan-Hellenic colony being founded in southern Italy. Think about that. Pericles, most powerful man in Athens, taps Protagoras, a philosopher, an educator, a sophist, to write the fundamental laws for a new city.
That's incredible. That's not just giving lectures, that's nation building almost.
It absolutely elevates him. It shows he was respected not just as a teacher, but as a serious political theorist, a lawgiver. It really underscores his intellectual weight and his practical engagement with the political realities of his time. He wasn't just talking abstract ideas. He was helping shape real-world governance. And this ties into the bigger picture of the sophistic movement itself. Protagoras wasn't just some lone genius. He was the leading light of this, truly revolutionary social and intellectual wave.
So what were the sophists doing that was so revolutionary?
They were fundamentally changing the game of education in the Greek world. They were these itinerant professional educators.
Chaplain teachers.
Exactly, moving from city to city, offering what we'd probably call higher education. And their focus was on R2.
Which we translate as virtue, but it's broader than that.
Much broader. It's excellence, ability, skill, especially the skills needed to succeed in public life, in civic affairs.
So practical skills for ambitious young men.
Intensely practical. Their curriculum wasn't about cosmology like the old pre-Socratics. It was about rhetoric, the art of persuasion, argumentation heuristics, how to debate effectively, political management, even grammar for clear expression.
A toolkit for getting ahead in places like Athens.
Precisely. All geared towards effective performance in the democratic assembly, in the law courts. They were giving people the tools they needed to navigate and influence their world. And you really can't understand why they popped up without looking at Athens in the 5th century BCE. It was unique.
How so? What was special about Athens?
Well, it was a radical, direct democracy, not representative like ours. Any male citizen could stand up in the assembly and try to sway policy.
So persuasion was literally political power.
Absolutely. And on top of that, you have this incredibly litigious legal system. Citizens had to argue their own cases. There weren't professional lawyers pleading for you.
You had to be your own advocate. Wow.
Yeah. So the ability to speak clearly, persuasively, compellingly, it wasn't just a bonus, it was essential for political influence, for protecting your property, even for staying out of trouble legally.
So the sophists were basically meeting a market demand created by Athenian democracy itself.
Exactly. They weren't some outside force imposing themselves. They emerged organically because the very structure of Athenian public life required the skills they taught. Practical wisdom for a very public life. But just because they were useful didn't mean everyone loved them.
Far from it.
They faced pushback.
A lot of it. Suspicion, hostility. Several reasons. They were often foreigners. They charged these huge fees, which seemed crass to some aristocrats.
Seemed like they were selling wisdom, maybe?
Yeah.
That was the accusation. And traditionalists worried they were undermining old-fashioned values, respect for elders, conventional piety. You can almost hear the grumbling, right?
Yeah.
These outsiders teaching our kids how to argue about everything.
Yeah, I can picture that.
And this negative view got cemented later by Plato and Aristotle. They drew this very sharp line. Philosophers like themselves seek truth for its own sake. Sophists, they claimed, just sell the appearance of wisdom for money, using dodgy arguments to win.
That's a pretty damning critique. And it stuck, didn't it?
For millennia, it really shaped the historical reputation of the Sophists, often quite unfairly, as we're now starting to appreciate more.
That distinction is key. So Protagoras and the Sophists, they weren't just teachers, they were leading this massive intellectual shift, the Greek Enlightenment.
Right, that pivot we mentioned.
From thesis, the cosmos, nature.
To nomos and logos.
Wow.
Law, custom, culture, language, the human world.
And Protagoras embodied this. He came from Abdera, which was an Ionian intellectual center.
Home of Democritus, yeah. Steeped in that rational, scientific-ish tradition.
But he took that critical mindset and aimed it not at the stars, but at the polis, the city-state.
Exactly. He applied that Ionian rational critique to human institutions, human beliefs.
And he even reframed his own job description, didn't he? Claiming to be part of the tradition of paideia education, going back to Homer and Hesiod.
Right, linking himself to the revered poets and sages.
But with a twist, he secularized it, professionalized it. The wise man wasn't a divinely inspired poet anymore. He was a paid expert teaching civic skills.
A very modern-sounding move, in a way.
It really is. It put him in this fascinating position, bridging these worlds, taking Ionian rationalism into the very practical political heart of democratic Athens.
And you have to remember the context. This was an era of incredible intellectual ferment.
Everything was up for grabs.
Pretty much.
Sure.
Thinkers like Thucydides, the historian, Euripides, the playwright, they were all critically examining long-held beliefs about the gods, the state, morality. Everything was being questioned.
So Protagoras' agnosticism, his relativism, it wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Not at all. It was emblematic of this new, critical, intensively human-focused spirit that was sweeping through the Greek world, especially Athens. It makes you think how often big societal changes and intellectual shifts go hand in hand, which brings us right into the core ideas, the doctrines of Protagoras himself. And you have to start with the big one. The homo mensura thesis. Man is the measure.
From his book Truth, right? Aletheia.
That's the one, the opening line. Of all things the measure is man, of the things that they are, and of the things that are not, that they are not.
Just calling the book Truth while saying that must have been provocative.
Oh, deliberately so.
Yeah.
It was a direct challenge to that whole pre-Socratic search for the single objective truth about reality. Protagoras is saying, hold on, let's center this on us.
Okay, so what does it mean, man is the measure?
Well, its power is partly in its ambiguity. There are at least two main ways to interpret it, and they might even work together.
All right, let's hear them.
Okay, interpretation number one, the one Plato really focuses on in the Theaetetus, is that man means each individual person.
So I am the measure of things for me.
Precisely. It leads to this radical perceptual and epistemological relativism. The classic example is the wind.
Right, I've heard this one.
If the wind feels cold to you and warm to me, standing right next to you,
then it is cold for me and it is warm for you.
Exactly. Neither perception is truer in some objective sense.
Yeah.
Your individual experience is the final arbiter of your reality.
And this extends beyond just hot and cold.
Protagoras seems to have extended it to all judgments. Plato has him basically saying the soul is its sensations. So whatever appears to you is true for you.
Wow. So objective truth, totally independent of us.
This is inaccessible, maybe even meaningless.
Yeah.
All you have are these private subjective truths. Your perception is your reality.
That's mind-bending. You can see how that echoes today, right? People talking about my truth.
Absolutely. It forces that question. If everyone's perception is their own valid reality, how do we even agree on anything? Okay, but there's a second, complementary reading. It's actually relevant for Protagoras, the political theorist.
The guy who wrote the Constitution for theory.
Right. In this reading, man doesn't mean the individual, but the collective.
Yeah.
Humanity, or maybe more specifically, the polis, the city-state community.
So The community is the measure.
Of public values, yes. While the individual might be the measure of private feelings like hot or cold, the community becomes the measure of things like justice or honor. Plato actually attributes this view to him, too. Whatever sort of thing appears just and honorable to each city is so for that city for as long as it so deems.
Okay, so this explains why different cities have different laws and customs, and none of them are necessarily wrong.
Exactly. It provides a philosophical basis for cultural relativism for the diversity of nomoi, laws customs. There's no higher divine or natural standard of justice floating out there. Justice is what a particular community agrees upon.
It's social conventionalism.
Pretty much. Law comes from human agreement, not from the gods or nature. Very pragmatic. But wait, this relativism, whether individual or social, seems to create a huge problem for Protagoras himself, doesn't it? Well, if every belief is true for the person or city holding it, then how can Protagoras claim to be a wise man? How can his teaching be better than anyone else's? And why should anyone pay him those massive fees if his opinions aren't actually truer?
Yeah, that seems like a contradiction. If my opinion is just as true as his, why pay him?
It's a paradox. But Protagoras, or at least the Protagoras Plato reconstructs, had a really clever answer.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
He redefines wisdom. It's not about having access to some truer reality. Instead, wisdom is a practical therapeutic skill, like a doctor or a farmer.
How does that work?
A doctor doesn't tell a sick patient, your feeling of illness is false. They accept the patient's state. But through their skill, their medicine, they change the patient's state from unhealthy to healthy. And when the patient is healthy, better things appear to them. Food tastes good again, the world looks brighter. The wise sophist, Protagoras argues, does the same thing with logos, with speech. He doesn't necessarily give you truer beliefs in an absolute sense.
Yeah.
He uses his skill to change your state, or the city's state, from a worse one to a better one, making more beneficial, more useful, more advantageous things appear true to you or the city.
So wisdom isn't about truth, it's about utility, making things better.
Exactly. The wise orator persuades the city to adopt laws that are more useful, not necessarily more true in some grand metaphysical way. It's a pragmatic measure of value. I can't give you the truth, but I can help make your life or your city function better.
Okay, that's quite a defense. Now, if the man is the measure idea wasn't enough to cause a stir, let's talk about his statement on the gods. That also landed him in hot water, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's arguably just as famous or infamous.
From his book on the gods, what'd he actually say?
The quote we have is, "About the gods, I am not able to know whether they exist or do not exist, nor what they are like in form. For the factors preventing knowledge are many. The obscurity of the subject and the shortness of human life."
Wow. That's pretty direct.
It is. And just like man is the measure, it's open to interpretation.
What's the most straightforward way to read it?
As a statement of, well, profound intellectual honesty, epistemological humility. He's saying, look, this topic, the divine, it's really obscure, and our lives are incredibly short. Given these limitations, I just can't claim to know for certain.
So he's not necessarily saying the gods don't exist.
No. He's denying our human capacity to have certain knowledge about them. It's a refusal to speculate beyond the evidence, beyond what humans can reasonably grasp, almost a kind of methodological principle. Don't claim knowledge you can't back up.
Like an early agnostic.
That's exactly how it's usually described, acknowledging the limits of human knowledge regarding the divine.
But knowing Protagoras, there are probably more radical ways to interpret it.
Oh, absolutely. Some scholars have argued it's a kind of covert atheism, meaning it was a socially safer way to dismiss the whole business of theology in an age where being openly atheist could be dangerous, even fatal. Saying, I can't know, might have been a polite way of saying, let's not waste time on this unknowable stuff.
Plausible deniability.
Perhaps. But regardless of his private beliefs, think about the public effect of that statement.
What would that be?
If you declare that the nature and even the existence of the gods are unknowable, you effectively remove divine will as a reliable foundation for morality and law.
Right. If we can't know what the gods want, we can't base our laws on their commands.
Exactly. So if humans can't rely on the gods for moral guidance, who do they rely on?
Themselves, the community.
Precisely. It clears the conceptual space. It implicitly shifts the basis of social order from divine authority to human agreement to nomos. So his agnosticism isn't just a personal stance. It underpins his whole political philosophy where humans have to figure things out for themselves. And this need for humans to figure things out, to debate and decide, leads us straight to another core Protagorean idea, antilogiai.
The two arguments doctrine.
That's the one. He's famously credited with being the first to explicitly state that on every issue, there are two arguments, logoi, opposed to each other.
So for any topic, there are always two sides to the story.
At least two, yeah. And his teaching method, reflected in a work supposedly titled Antilogiai, or Contradictory Arguments, involved training students to dissect issues, identify these opposing arguments, and learn how to articulate both sides effectively.
Like advanced debate training.
You could see it that way. Learning to see an issue from multiple perspectives and argue convincingly for each. But this practice led to probably the most damaging accusation against him.
Which was?
That he taught how to make the weaker argument the stronger.
Oof. Yeah, that sounds bad. Like teaching people how to cheat.
That's exactly how his critics, like Aristophanes in his comedy The Clouds and Plato, portrayed it. They saw it as pure moral nihilism, teaching rhetorical tricks to make injustice look just, to make lies sound true, basically undermining the whole social fabric.
You can see why people would be outraged. He's teaching kids to argue that black is white.
Right. It feeds into that caricature of the sophist as someone who cares only about winning, not about truth or justice, like the original spin doctor. This accusation really tarnished the reputation of the sophists for centuries. But is there a more charitable way to understand making the weaker argument stronger?
There has to be, right? Or he wouldn't have been so respected.
Well, many modern scholars argue there is. Think about it. What does weaker mean here? Does it automatically mean unjust or false?
Not necessarily.
It could just mean the argument that's less popular, or less intuitive, or maybe just poorly presented initially.
Okay, so making the weaker argument stronger could mean giving the unpopular view a proper hearing.
Exactly. Or taking a potentially valid point that's been badly articulated and presenting it in its strongest possible form. The goal from this perspective isn't to make lies triumph, but to ensure that all sides of an issue get the most robust defense possible.
Why would that be important?
So that decisions, whether in a law court or the political assembly, are made based on a thorough examination of all the merits, not just on prejudice, or because one side happened to have a slicker speaker initially. It's about intellectual fairness, ensuring every viewpoint is properly considered before judgment.
So it's actually fundamental to good deliberation, to dialectic, even to law.
Arguably, yes. It's about stress-testing ideas, ensuring that conclusions are reached after considering the strongest possible counterarguments, not subverting truth, but ensuring a more rigorous path towards the best possible conclusion in a human context.
That definitely puts a different spin on it, and it seems to connect really well with his political ideas, especially his defense of democracy.
Absolutely.
Our best source for that is Plato's dialogue Protagoras, specifically the great speech Plato puts in his mouth.
Right, from 320C to 328 pence. It's a remarkable piece.
In it, Protagoras is basically defending his claim that he can teach political virtue are true, and he's doing it against Socrates, who's pretty skeptical.
Deeply skeptical, yeah.
So how does Protagoras make his case? He tells a story, right? A myth.
He does. A myth about human origins, how we got civilized. It involves the Titan brothers, Epimetheus and Prometheus.
Epimetheus means afterthought, and Prometheus forethought.
That's them. They're distributing qualities to all the animals for survival. Epimetheus, being forgetful, hands out all the good stuff, claws, fur, wings, and completely forgets about humans.
Oops! So humans are left defenseless.
Naked, shoeless, weaponless. Prometheus, the clever one, sees this disaster and steals technical skills, techna, and fire from the gods to help humans survive.
Okay, so now we have tools and fire.
Right. We can feed ourselves, build shelter, but we still lack the political art. Humans live scattered, they prey on each other, they can't cooperate. Zeus, king of the gods, gets worried we'll wipe ourselves out.
So Zeus steps in.
He sends Hermes, the messenger god, down with two crucial gifts for humanity, Aegis and Decay.
Aegis is like reverence, respect for others, and decay is justice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the absolute key point in Protagoras' telling. Zeus tells Hermes to distribute these qualities not just to a select few, like the specialized technical skills,
but to everyone.
to all human beings. Because, Zeus says, a city cannot exist unless everyone partakes in justice and reverence. You can't have a functioning society without that universal foundation.
Wow. Okay, so how does that myth support his argument for teaching virtue and for democracy?
It's the philosophical bedrock. Because all humans have this innate capacity for justice and respect, political virtue isn't some rare talent only aristocrats possess. It's a universal human potential.
So that explains why Athenians listen to anyone speak about politics.
Exactly. Because everyone's presumed to have that basic civic capacity, but they only listen to experts, like shipbuilders or doctors, on technical matters, because those skills are specialized. And Protagoras then argues that all of society, parents raising kids, schools teaching, laws being enforced, punishment being applied, is essentially a system designed to cultivate this innate potential, to nurture everyone's sense of justice and respect.
So virtue is teachable because society is constantly teaching it.
That's his point. He even makes a really insightful argument about punishment. Its purpose isn't vengeance for the past. You can't undo what's done.
So what's the point then?
Deterrence and reform. To teach the wrongdoer and teach everyone else watching how to be virtuous in the future. It's forward-looking.
The whole thing sounds like a pretty powerful defense of democracy.
It really is. It's a robust philosophical argument for why a system based on universal participation makes sense and why education paideia is absolutely central to making that system work. So if you put all these pieces together, the agnosticism, the man is the measure, the two arguments, the teachable virtue, you start to see this isn't just a random collection of ideas. There's a real structure here.
A coherent system.
I think so. There's a logical flow. Start with the agnosticism about the gods.
Okay, that clears the ground, gets divine authority out of the way as the source of truth or value.
Exactly. No fixed external rulebook, which then logically leads to
Man is the measure. Humanity, either individually or collectively, has to create its own rules, its own values.
right. We become the legislators of reality and value. But if we're all making our own rules,
We're going to disagree. Conflict is inevitable.
precisely, which necessitates a method for handling disagreement. And that's where,
The antilogiai comes in, the art of arguing both sides.
yes, it becomes the tool for public debate, for deliberation, for trying to reach some kind of consensus when values clash. It's the mechanism for navigating a world where truth is human-made.
Okay, and then to make that whole system sustainable.
You need citizens who are capable of participating effectively and justly. Which brings us to
The teachability of virtue. Education becomes the way you cultivate those civic virtues needed for the human-centered political order to actually function.
you see the progression. It moves systematically. From epistemology, what can we know, leading to his agnosticism, to axiology, who decides what's good, answered by homo mensura, to discourse theory, how do we debate these human values, addressed by antilogiai, and finally to pedagogy and politics, how do we cultivate citizens and sustain this order through the teachability of virtue? It's a remarkably integrated philosophical picture.
That systematic view really helps, especially given that, as we keep saying, our main window onto Protagoras is Plato.
Who had his own agenda.
Right. Plato engages with Protagoras more than any other sophist. Two whole major dialogues, Protagoras and Thesis, are largely focused on him or his ideas.
He looms large in Plato's work.
But what's fascinating, and what you've hinted at, is how different the Protagoras in each dialogue seems.
Night and day, almost.
It really suggests Plato is using Protagoras as a kind of philosophical character, tailoring him to fit the specific argument he wants to make in each dialogue.
Like casting an actor in different roles, depending on the play. The name's the same, but the function is different. And the contrast is really striking when you look at the dialogue Protagoras first. How is he presented there?
Dignified, respected.
Very much so. He's portrayed as formidable, eloquent, confident, clearly held in high regard by everyone around him, including the young men eager to study with him. Plato gives him the floor for that long, powerful, great speech.
The defense of teaching virtue we just discussed.
Exactly. It's a coherent, sophisticated argument. He's presented as the leading representative of a major intellectual movement, not some cheap trickster.
But Socrates still challenges him.
Oh, relentlessly. Socrates argues circles around him on certain points about the unity of virtue. But even when Protagoras is cornered logically, he maintains his dignity. He even graciously praises Socrates' skill at the end. It's a respectful portrayal, even if it's ultimately critical. And the main fight in that dialogue is about Artuso, virtue. What are the opposing views?
Protagoras starts by saying he teaches it, and he sees virtues, justice, piety, courage, temperance, as distinct but related qualities. Like parts of a face, he says nose, eyes, mouth, all different but part of the whole.
Makes intuitive sense.
But Socrates pushes back hard, arguing for the unity of virtues. He tries to show they aren't separate things, but all ultimately boil down to one thing, episteme, knowledge.
For Socrates, if you truly know the good, you'll do the good. Vice is just ignorance.
Right.
And this leads to that famous ironic twist at the end, the great reversal.
Can you remind us how that goes?
Okay, so Protagoras, who started by insisting virtue is teachable, gets maneuvered by Socrates' arguments into a position that seems to imply courage might not be the same as wisdom, and therefore maybe not straightforwardly teachable in the way he initially claimed.
He gets tangled up.
While Socrates, who started out deeply skeptical about teaching virtue, ends up concluding that since virtue is knowledge, it absolutely must be teachable.
They swap positions, kind of.
Exactly. It's deeply ironic. But it's more than just a clever debating trick. It highlights this massive gap between Protagoras' view of virtue, practical, social habits cultivated through practice, and Socrates' view, a radical intellectual state, pure knowledge of the good. They're operating with fundamentally different definitions.
Okay, so that's Protagoras and the Protagoras, dignified opponent, debating the nature of virtue. Now, shift gears to the thesis. How does he appear there? Is it the same guy?
Not even close. It's a completely different approach. First off, Protagoras isn't actually in the dialogue.
He's not a character.
No. He's dead by this point, likely.
Yeah.
But his doctrine, the homo mensura thesis, is brought up by Socrates and becomes the main focus of the first part of the dialogue.
So it's his ideas being dissected, not the man himself.
Exactly. And the Protagoras that emerges from this discussion is the champion of an incredibly radical epistemology. Socrates links man as the measure to a Heraclitean view of the universe as being in constant flux.
Everything is always changing.
Constantly. So reality becomes just this stream of private, fleeting moments of perception interactions between a perceiver and an object that never repeat. In this interpretation, knowledge literally is perception, because there's nothing stable behind the perception to know. Only subjective appearance exists.
That sounds way more extreme than the guy in the Protagoras dialogue.
Much more extreme. It's a vision of total relativism and subjectivism, where stable, objective knowledge is simply impossible.
Okay, if reality is that slippery, how does Socrates even try to argue against it? It sounds unfalsifiable.
He uses a very famous logical argument, the paratropy or self-refutation argument.
How does that work? It sounds complicated.
The basic idea is reasonably simple, though the details get debated. It goes something like this. Protagoras says, every belief is true for the person who holds it.
Okay, got it. My belief is true for me, yours for you.
Right. But, Socrates points out, some people believe that Protagoras' thesis is false.
Okay.
So if Protagoras' thesis is true, then the belief of those opponents that his thesis is false must also be true for them.
Ah, so Protagoras has to admit that his own theory is, in a way, false?
According to Plato's Socrates, yes. By his own relativistic standard, he's forced to concede the truth of the belief that his thesis is false. Therefore, the thesis refutes itself. Boom. Mic drop.
That seems devastatingly clever. Did it work? Is that the final word?
Well, it was incredibly influential for centuries. But modern scholarship has put that argument under a very powerful microscope.
Does it hold up?
The consensus among many experts now is probably not, or at least not as cleanly as Plato presents it. They argue Plato commits a subtle but really crucial error.
What's the error?
He basically forces the Protagorean to drop the relativistic qualifier at the key moment. A consistent relativist wouldn't say, okay, my thesis is false, period. They'd say, okay, my thesis is false for you, my opponent.
Ah, keeping the for whom part attached.
Exactly. From the relativist's own perspective, their thesis remains true for me. Plato makes it seem like Protagoras has to accept its absolute falsity, but a consistent relativist wouldn't grant that.
So Plato's victory might be more rhetorical than strictly logical. He kind of bends the rules of relativism to beat it.
That's what many argue. It's a brilliant piece of philosophical argumentation by Plato, no doubt, but its logical conclusiveness against a sophisticated relativist is now seriously questioned. It tells us a lot about Plato's skill, and perhaps his determination to defeat this viewpoint.
Which brings us back to why Plato was so determined. Why did he need to portray Protagoras this way in the Theaetetus and refute him so thoroughly, even if the logic is debatable?
Because for Plato, this wasn't just an academic debate. Protagorean relativism, especially in this radical form, was dangerous, profoundly dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Because if there's no objective truth, if knowledge is just perception, then what happens to morality? What happens to justice? What happens to the political order? If good is just what seems good to me or my city right now, then there's no stable basis for ethics or law.
It all dissolves into shifting opinions.
Exactly. And Plato's entire philosophical project, his theory of forms, the idea of the philosopher king ruling based on knowledge of the absolute good, All of it depends fundamentally on the existence of objective, unchanging truth.
So Protagoras, or at least this version of Protagoras, was attacking the very foundation of Plato's life's work.
He was the subtlest enemy, as one scholar put it. His relativism cut right to the root. So refuting him wasn't just an intellectual exercise for Plato, it was an imperative ethical requirement. He had to show relativism was untenable, logically or socially, to clear the ground for his own positive philosophy of objective truth and value. So when you look at the two dialogues side by side, the contrast is stark, isn't it? It really highlights that Plato's goal wasn't to give us a historically precise photo of Protagoras.
No, he was using him for philosophical purposes.
Exactly. He constructed the Protagoras that best served the specific intellectual drama of each dialogue.
Can we quickly recap the main differences then?
Sure. In the Protagoras dialogue, his role is primarily teacher of political virtue. His central doctrine is that virtue, arito, is teachable, the basis of society. The focus is ethics, political philosophy, education. He's characterized as dignified, respected, a serious theorist. Socrates' critique focuses on the unity of virtue and whether Protagoras truly knows it.
Okay, and in the Theaetetus?
His role is proponent of radical epistemological relativism. His central doctrine is man is the measure, interpreted as knowledge is perception. The focus is epistemology, metaphysics, perception, flux. He's characterized as a disembodied doctrine linked to Heraclitus, argued about in his absence. Socrates' critique focuses on logical incoherence and self-refutation.
Totally different angles.
Completely. The apparent contradiction isn't necessarily in the historical Protagoras, but in Plato's strategic deployment of him as a philosophical foil. It's a masterclass in using an opponent's ideas to build your own system.
It really underscores Protagoras' legacy, doesn't it? Maybe not as the founder of a school of thought, he didn't really have Protagoreans following him.
No, not in that sense.
But his legacy is in the sheer power of the challenge he presented. He was the antagonist, the intellectual foil, whose ideas basically forced Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle to develop their own philosophies in response.
He set the agenda, in a negative way almost.
We talked about how Protagoras and the Sophists shifted philosophy towards human concerns, ethics, politics, language. Socrates absolutely operates on that ground.
He picks up those same questions, yeah. What is justice? What is virtue?
But where Protagoras seemed to offer answers based on conventions, social agreement, practical utility, Socrates demanded something more.
He wanted universal, unchanging definitions,
Right.
essences.
Right. So that whole Socratic quest, what is justice itself, what is piety itself, you can see that as a direct reaction against the Protagorean idea that these things are just relative or conventional.
Socrates is trying to find the stable bedrock that Protagoras seemed to deny was there. His whole method, the elenchus, aims to strip away inconsistent opinions to get at that underlying objective knowledge. And then Plato takes that Socratic impulse and builds an entire metaphysical system as the ultimate answer to Protagoras.
The theory of forms.
Exactly. Faced with a Protagorean world of shifting appearances and relative values, Plato posits this whole other realm, a higher, stable, eternal reality. The form.
The perfect blueprint of justice, beauty, goodness.
Right. Eternal, unchanging archetypes. These provide the absolute objective grounding for knowledge and morality that Protagoras, especially the Theaetetus version, seem to make impossible.
So that famous Platonic split the world of being, the forms known by reason, versus the world of becoming, the changing, sensible world known by opinion or doxa.
Is a direct metaphysical rebuttal of Protagorean relativism. Where Protagoras saw only the flux of appearances or human conventions, Plato establishes this firm hierarchy with unchanging truth at the top. You could honestly say Protagoras' philosophy is the problem to which Plato's theory of forms is the solution.
He was the necessary other.
Absolutely. He gave Plato's project its urgency, its adversary. Without that powerful challenge, maybe Platonism wouldn't have been forged with such rigor.
And even Aristotle, Plato's student, kept wrestling with Protagoras. How did he tackle him?
Aristotle comes at it from a more, logical angle. In his metaphysics, he hammers away at the homo mensura doctrine, primarily on the grounds that it violates the most basic law of logic, the principle of non-contradiction.
Meaning something can't be both true and false at the same time in the same respect.
Exactly. Aristotle argues that if every appearance is true, then the same thing, like the wind, must be both cold and not cold simultaneously if it appears that way to different people. For Aristotle, this just makes rational thought and meaningful conversation impossible. It leads to utter incoherence.
So, for Aristotle, Protagoras' core idea undermines the very possibility of reasoning. But Did Aristotle just dismiss him entirely? Or did he see any value in Protagoras' work?
Oh, he wasn't entirely dismissive. Despite rejecting the epistemology, Aristotle, who was very interested in classifying knowledge, actually gave Protagoras credit in other areas,
Like what?
particularly in pioneering work on grammar and the analysis of language logos. Aristotle notes Protagoras was concerned with things like classifying noun genders and different types of sentences, like prayer, question, command.
So the beginnings of linguistics, or formal rhetoric?
Kind of. Aristotle saw him as an important initiator in the systematic study of how language works. So even his sharpest critics acknowledged he made contributions, particularly in understanding discourse itself. He helped build the toolkit for analyzing thought and speech, even if they rejected his conclusions. Fast forward to the modern era, the 20th and 21st centuries, and there's been this really significant shift in how Protagoras is viewed.
A reevaluation?
Definitely. Scholars started moving beyond just reading him through Plato's critical lens and tried to assess him on his own terms. This has led to a major rehabilitation of his reputation.
People are taking him more seriously as a philosopher in his own right.
Absolutely. Instead of just dismissing his relativism as obviously wrong or silly, scholars are now analyzing it with much more nuance. What kind of nuances?
Well, exploring whether it's best understood as radical subjectivism, or maybe a more defensible cultural relativism, or even a form of pragmatism focusing on what works, what's useful, like the therapeutic view of wisdom we talked about.
Exactly. And contemporary philosophers have drawn connections. Joseph Margolis, for example, explicitly linked Protagoras to modern theories of robust relativism, arguing that non-absolutist views of truth can actually be coherent.
And his focus on language, on logos.
That's seen as incredibly prescient now. His emphasis on how speech shapes reality, how it changes beliefs and experiences, it anticipates so much in 20th century linguistic philosophy, even postmodern thought about discourse constructing reality.
So he's not just denying truth. He's offering a complex theory of how truth gets made.
That's the more sophisticated reading now. How truth is constructed within human communities and through language. This raises huge questions for us today, doesn't it? In our media landscape, our political debates.
And that connects to another aspect of his rehabilitation, seeing him as a serious theorist of democracy.
Yes, moving beyond just relativist.
That great speech in Plato's Protagoras is now often read not just as rhetoric, but as a genuine philosophical argument for democracy.
A foundational text for democratic theory.
Right. The core idea that everyone has an innate capacity for justice and civic virtue provides this powerful justification for why the people should rule, why participation should be broad.
It grounds democracy in a specific view of human nature.
And his view of law, nomos, as something created by community agreement through debate.
Rather than handed down by gods or discovered in nature.
That provides a theoretical basis for a society that governs itself, creates its own rules through democratic means. It feels incredibly relevant when we talk about social contracts or deliberative democracy today.
So overall, you see this real effort in modern scholarship to rescue Protagoras from the caricature.
To see him as more than just Plato's punching bag.
Exactly. To recognize him as a first-rate philosopher who made foundational contributions. The work on grammar, the development of dialectical argument, the profoundly human-centered perspective. These are now seen as major achievements. And it's interesting how his relevance seems almost cyclical. His ideas seem to really resonate in times like ours, perhaps, that are also skeptical of grand, absolute certainties.
When universal narratives feel shaky.
Precisely. For centuries, the Platonic Aristotelian tradition, with its focus on objective truth, kind of held sway, and Protagoras was sidelined as this refuted heretic.
The loser in the philosophical debate.
Right. But then, in modern and postmodern thought, with the focus shifting to perspective language, cultural differences, power dynamics, suddenly Protagoras looks incredibly relevant again.
Like he was asking our questions 2,500 years ago.
In many ways, yes. His core concerns, how do we construct meaning? How do we live together without absolute moral anchors? How does language shape our world? These feel very contemporary. The renewed interest in him isn't just historical curiosity. It reflects our own philosophical climate. We're wrestling with alternative facts, the foundations of multiculturalism, the nature of truth in a pluralistic world. Protagoras feels like he speaks directly to these issues.
So pulling it all together, looking back at the fragments, the critiques, the modern reassessments, Protagoras of Abdera really stands out, doesn't he? Not just a footnote, but truly foundational. He led that massive humanistic turn in philosophy. He gave us one of the most powerful, enduring formulations of relativism. He offered maybe the first systematic defense of democracy based on universal human capacity. He professionalized education, putting language and argument right at the center.
Huge contributions across the board, but maybe, just maybe, his most profound impact was being that indispensable foil, the great challenger, the one whose ideas were so potent they literally forced classical philosophy as we know it into being.
Socrates' quest, Plato's forms, Aristotle's logic, all forged in response to the Protagorean challenge.
You can strongly argue that. He asked the deeply unsettling questions about truth, knowledge, and value that Plato and Aristotle spent their lives trying to answer definitively. Without the problem of Protagoras, the solutions of Platonism and Aristotelianism might look very different, or perhaps lack their enduring power. That's why he feels so urgent today, I think. We're living in an age that's wrestling intensely with cultural pluralism, with fragmented public discourse, with fundamental questions about truth itself.
His ideas aren't just historical artifacts.
Not at all. Man is the measure of all things. That's not just a quote from the past. It's a live philosophical starting point for our world. It forces us to confront how we build our realities, how we justify our values, how we navigate disagreement when the foundations seem contested.
The questions he raised are still echoing.
Powerfully. And the enduring force of those questions is his true legacy. It guarantees his stature as a philosopher, not just for his time, but absolutely for ours as well.
Absolutely. Those questions are definitely still with us, challenging how we think about everything from personal beliefs to global politics. If this has sparked your curiosity, we really encourage you to dive into the sources yourself. Maybe start with Plato's Protagoras and Theaetetus. See how you read him.
Definitely worth the read.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this exploration here at AI History of Western Philosophy.
Always a pleasure.
We hope you'll join us again next time for another journey through the history of thought.